I trained myself early in my career to operate on fumes all the time, pushing through one more email, one more response, one more message. And so post somatic work, it was realizing that operating 24/7 at 50% was serving nobody.
This is Working with Feeling. I'm Oren, and I'm really glad you're here for this one. We have the brilliant Rachel Nazhand on the podcast today. Rachel is exactly the reason I started this podcast project, and I'm so grateful for the continued connections that are emerging as a result of putting this work out there more. Because as you'll hear from Rachel, some of us have to take a long, winding road to reintegrate our humanity into the way we work and have both success and health and groundedness in ourselves. From doing the corporate thing, burning out, ER visits, seeing if I leave corporate, that'll fix it. It didn't. And then arriving to this deeper work of somatics and working with feeling. Rachel is somebody who has been there and to me is now a model for what it can look like to integrate what we talk about on this podcast into your day-to-day as a leader. Rachel is a business operations leader who pivoted from climbing the Fortune 100 corporate ladder to scaling multiple early stage startups, and now operates in high-growth pre-IPO environments. Her current focus, bringing startup agility to the private equity world through centralized ops and transformation. After cycling through mental and physical burnout, Rachel committed to a deep somatic practice, one that now supports her in leading ambitious organizations while staying present and healthy in her own body. She's a mother of two and a fierce believer that sustainable leadership starts from the inside out. Rachel refers to somatic body-based work as an immeasurable unlock for continuing to pursue her career while prioritizing her health. And I think you'll notice in the way she shares about it that she demonstrates the way somatic awareness can exist alongside passion and within fast-paced environments. Enjoy this episode with Rachel Nazhand, and remember to subscribe, leave a review, and as you're listening, think of a friend who might get value out of this conversation and share it with them. Was there a period of time where what you were going for was to be even keeled all the time? That's the goal?
That's what we're pitched, right? Like you wake up and you have your protein shake and you do your 45 minutes in the gym and you have this like perfect, it's the 5 a.m. wake up packaging that we've been now sold, that if you haven't had your ice bath and your protein enriched latte, if you haven't started your day perfectly, then you're not worthy, right? And it's, I think, giving people more permission to show up in the way that makes sense in that moment is actually the work. It's not nailing the formula.
What do you think was helpful for you in being able to shift out of that way that we're conditioned?
It's leaning into what it feels like when it's off, because there's something about feeling off that makes you appreciate feeling like your best self even more. And so there was this mindset I had before where when I wasn't, moving my body as much as I wanted to, when I was going to bed later than I intended to, when I felt like the bear was chasing me at work, it felt, there was always a pile-on effect before where it was like, well, I'm doing it wrong, or I'm not using the tools that I have, and it felt like failure. And so what has shifted is giving myself permission to feel the off periods and appreciate them for what they are. And so it's saying, I'm not going to bed on time anymore because my life is so full right now. And I know I will feel rested later, right? It's a battery that can always be recharged versus this thing. It's not a glass ball necessarily. And so just kind of giving myself, it was taking the guilt and the pressure out of it, and really instead just leaning into the difference of how it felt and the signals it was giving me. And so then the spikiness that really plagued my 20s, right? The highs and then the crash. My goal is no longer the highs, but my goal is keeping kind of like the squiggly line right at the middle. And knowing that means that in order to have this up, there's a little bit of the down and vice versa. And that has been oh, the permission has been just a weight off, because bad days can just be bad days. They aren't defining moments in the story of my life.
I'm so glad we're starting here because this, what you're describing is typically, especially early on in somatic work, is the unlock for the leaders I work with, is this recognition of, oh, what I'm going for is not just a straight line across. But actually, what I'm recognizing is, oh, what I've been doing, what I'd grown accustomed to was that spike you were describing: hyper arousal, hypo arousal, hypo, and it's that experience is something I think most of us are familiar with, and so we think, oh, that the opposite of that is what you want. You want straight across, and when we recognize that being a human being and even just being part of the natural world means ebbs and flows, we're on a wave, up and down, but that there is what we refer to as the window of tolerance. There is this space where, as we're moving within that place that is reflective of our capacity within ourselves, we can be present and show up how we want to, as long as we're aware of, where am I?
Yeah, I could not agree more. And we're also in such an optimized, obsessed economy right now that it's that pursuit of the highs and the pursuit of the excellence that we sort of lose the whole point of working towards something that works for us and all of our seasons. And so it's a reframe that is incredibly powerful.
I know my journey toward connecting with this way of practicing presence and developing a way of working with like what's actually real for me. It was very convoluted, and there were some things that I tried along the way that were more in line with what we think we're supposed to do. And we think we're supposed to understand where everything came from. We think we're supposed to whip ourselves into shape, all these different ways of going about it. Some things claim to be about compassion, but it's actually about bypassing what's going on there and not letting it be there. So I'm curious what that stirs up for you, just to almost, in an effort to normalize the fact that it does not say something about you that you've tried all these different things and they haven't worked. It's actually what most of us have experienced.
It's a process of experimentation, right? And I think a lot of us grew up in a culture, at least I did, speaking for myself, I had a wonderful childhood, but I was never allowed to be sad. I think a lot of us grew up in the kind of suppressing the bad things and putting on the happy face. And so a lot of that then comes through also in a business culture, because inherently Western society is so uncomfortable with discomfort that we want to avoid it at all costs. And that comes through in how we show up in the world as well. And it's held us back, I'd say, in a lot of ways. When we approach discomfort with this lens of permanency, which is almost like we get spooked if we don't have the tools to think about it, where it's like, I'm stressed in my job right now, so I need a new one. I'm sad in my relationship, so it must not be the right one. And it's this all or nothing mindset that drives a lot of us to band-aid solutions and pressure to work harder or better or faster or meditate more, or go to the gym more, or drink more something, whatever the latest thing is, eat more kale. And instead leaning into this moment is hard, or this moment is sad, and what is that teaching me? And the other angle that I've come to peace with as I've kind of gone through these phases in my own life and my own journey is realizing that what is serving me today may not be true tomorrow, but it could be true the next day. And I've found that this inconsistency is actually my consistency, which is a little confusing to think about, but letting that be my pattern is what has been incredibly helpful. And that's shown up in my professional life, where I can have a string of hyper productive days where my 100% is someone else's 200. And then I give myself permission to not get sidetracked by the day that is my 50%. And that applies in my life as well. And so it's this, again, going back to the line, right? And it's leaning into the discomfort as a signal. Because I'll say the other thing, and you know this very well, if we don't listen to it, our body will make the choice to pause on our behalf if we don't intentionally create that space. And I have paid that price. Many of us have. And sometimes you can barrel through it, but sometimes your nervous system just says, that's it, lights off. We're breaking now.
Yeah, the signal gets louder and louder and louder until you can no longer avoid it, no matter what you do. And I think most of us who have operated within the business context have experienced that. And I think we see it a lot as well. And what something that you were pointing to is another one of these almost cultural truisms that's actually very untrue, which is that this idea that if something is uncomfortable, something is wrong. Fix whatever, find what's wrong and fix it immediately, because something is very wrong if you're experiencing that discomfort, if you're being inconsistent, your ability to focus or your output is lower today than it really should be. We've learned that if we're doing everything right, we should be every day showing up with the same level of output, feeling the same way. And it's this, what's really underneath that, what we're taught is you should be able to control everything. If you just do everything right, you should be able to control
Yeah.
every outcome, including your inner experience. And if there's something wrong there, you better fix that right away, because that means you're broken.
Oh, the fallacy of control it's everywhere. And I've worked in chaotic high growth companies where that's the mantra. Like everything is fixable, everything needs to be optimized, and we apply that sense of needing to control in our lives as well. And the reframe I would offer is knowing the limitations of what you control. I think is really, it's not that we don't have some sort of free will over our lives, right? If you're not at 150% output kind of day, what can you lean into that is still controlling your situation? Or you can control your mindset. That is the only thing that you can have autonomy over, in terms of how I can't control the situation, but I can control how I react to it. And by controlling how I react to it, I might be able to influence the outcome to potentially something a little bit more desirable, or I can even maybe contain what might be perceived as the negative outcome. So if I'm feeling sad, previously I might go figure out how to make myself happy. But now it's sitting with it and realizing I feel sad because of this. And let's see what feels true about that. And then odds are I can take that uncomfortable experience and not fix it, but let it exist and fade away. And it often happens more quickly. So it's almost like holding that egg and hoping it won't break. And you've held it so hard that you've made it worse. And so how can you reimagine this idea of control as less about wielding the hammer and more about just approaching something with curiosity and care? And odds are it tends to have a better outcome. Progress over perfection there, but we assume that we can fix it, and by fixing it, we often just aggravate something that might not need that level of attention.
Yeah, well, going back to a word that you used a moment ago, it's where we keep pushing the signal away as opposed to integrating what information is in that signal. And actually, you brought up the companies you work within, and this is a big one that I see around the relationship between our ability to be with that discomfort within ourselves and actually integrate the signals within ourselves, and the ability to do that and be adaptive in our work. And I'm curious what you see in that connection.
So much overlap. And I'll actually borrow that word curiosity, because that is the key thing, especially when a situation feels unclear. So my relationship with work has changed significantly over the years, but most particularly how I approach people in the workplace. And it's taking a lens of peeling back the layers and really getting curious about what's behind an experience. And this is probably a total misuse of her framework, but Byron Katie, she has the 4 questions. It's used oftentimes in yoga practices and all kinds of different mindful practices. And The first question, is it true? And so I use that lens. I have a slightly different second question, which I always ask myself, is it true? And what else could be true? And by taking that little mini borrowed framework into the workplace, I can mentally diffuse so many situations where if my colleague has done something, an old version of me might think that it was considerate, or it was the wrong answer, or it was to take me down, or that's my mess to clean up. And so by taking a step back and getting curious about, is it true? And what else could be true? Is it true that they left me out of that important update meeting? Maybe, but what else could be true? Maybe what else is true is that they are keeping the list really tight, or they need to brief their own boss before they bring in another stakeholder, or there's all these other things. There's so much happening in the world that when we take a step back from rushing to apply some label or some meaning, we give ourselves permission to just take a literal and physical deep breath, but then also find the information we need to reframe that situation in our mind. If I'm feeling particularly stressed, maybe I'm stressed about, I don't know, some project I'm working on, and I'm stressed because I don't think my boss is going to like it. The first thing I ask myself on my own experience, is it true? Is it true that there is a high chance that my boss won't like this? Or the calendar invite with no context, right? And so you get that quick chat on your calendar, and that is the cue for every person's adrenaline to spike. And so I look at that and I ask myself, is it true that I have a reason to be concerned? It's my process to reset, and that really impacts how I'm able to show up at work. And it's a tool I try to give my teams as well, but it's just that second to like, am I actually being chased by the bear?
Exactly.
Or have I given myself a reason to create a story?
Yes. Yes. And having the space to be able to zoom out and just question, to your point, am I being chased by a bear? Because that is the neurochemistry that is being pumped through my body in those moments, and why we cannot stop obsessing and ruminating and could be this, and I have to go and do that. And in order to break that cycle, we have to have this practice of being able to say, okay, pattern interrupt. Wait a second. Let me be real with what's going on here. I'm immediately, because this is what we learned to do, I'm going into, let me make sense of, okay, this could be happening because of this or because of that. And so that will help me fix the situation. And start with, let me sense what's actually happening. Let me give these signals a chance to come through. And before letting them inform how I'm thinking about a situation, what I'm doing about a situation, let me recognize them for what they are.
Absolutely. We often have more agency than we give ourselves credit for. And so if there is that moment of hyperarousal where ambiguity is what's causing the concern, even if the answer or the outcome doesn't change, I find if I ask the question, or at least put my concern or voice the thing that it is that's bothering me, of, hey, you put this calendar invite, is there anything I should be wondering about in advance? Anything I should prepare? And even if I get no answer, even just that act of getting the concern out of my head, out of my body, and into the universe, really, it almost gives my system this permission to say, well, we've done what we can. We've gotten that out, and then I can move forward, even if quite literally nothing else has changed other than I've sent one email, one message, whatever. It's a form of release, of showing that I do have that sense of control, but a healthy sense of control, and a sense that I am proactively advocating for myself, whenever what that means in that situation. But it doesn't mean I have to fix it. And so it's a nuance, but I found it
Yeah.
very powerful one.
Yeah. I'll give a maybe a physical example of this, and let's see if this connects to what you're describing, because I think especially for those of us who are newer to integrating the signals that the body is bringing in terms of the way that we work, it can seem like we're talking about thinking about it a different way. But you're actually describing something which is in nervous system regulation speak. What you're describing to me is a form of orientation. So, in order for the nervous system to reestablish a felt sense of safety, which is the key, there's a reason why this comes up in pretty much every episode of this podcast, because it is the key given the nervous system's primary function is to keep us safe and alive. Safety is what opens up our ability to be present, to be creative, to be resourceful in a given moment. So when you're taking a moment to say, okay, I've got this experience that's happening within me, I'm starting to feel the adrenaline kick in, instead of going into that expression of fight flight that often looks like rumination, looks like externalization, blaming, basically, let me go and address this head on, or let me get out of here. For some others, it might look like total brain fog and I can't even function. And there's nothing wrong with any of those responses. There are different forms of responses to threats. But when you reorient, what you're doing is instead of ruminating about it, you're looking at, okay, what is the information that I can actually collect from around me? What can I see? What can I hear? What other inputs are available that maybe I haven't received? Let me ask for those. And this is one of the reasons I was so excited to bring you on and that you said yes to join me here, because this is when you're in fast-paced environments and there's a lot going on and you're expected to make decisions really quickly, and you're also not supposed to show that you're too affected by anything. What often happens is that people spiral, and everyone kind of has their own way, and you know, myself included, what it looks like to spiral within yourself, make it seem like everything's fine on the outside, but that tension builds and builds and builds. So that's a long way of leading up to asking about what is it, because I believe that there's a key that allows you to be able to go from rumination, reactivity into reorienting. There has to be a little bit of space between the stimulus, between the trigger and your immediate unconscious impulse to act. And so I'd love to hear what that brings up for you.
It brings up two things for me. So from the perspective of myself as the employee, I'm constantly making sure that I am in a position to respond, but not react. One, I listen to my body, where I notice if, you know, my heart rate increases, or I feel that kind of sense, or if my shoulders are really hunched up around my ears, that's a signal to me that whatever my next motion is probably not going to be something that will serve me long term. And so it's that reorientation of pausing. Sometimes I'll write the note or I'll write the email and I leave it in draft. Or if I can, I'll stand up and take a lap, or I'll turn my camera off for a second. And there's a word for it. I think it's neurogenic something, where I'll literally turn off the camera and shake my hands vigorously and just kind of get that sensation out of my body as much as I can. So a physical reset. That has been helpful for me when I can. When I'm coaching my teams, it looks a little bit more like naming and giving permission. So I'll watch for body language, and when I can and when it's appropriate, I'll help them reorient. So I'll notice, you know, if we're talking about something and I see those signals, the shoulders up, the expression change, the distraction, I'll try to help them. I can tell that news isn't landing well. Do you need a minute? Or it seems like you're having a hard time articulating what you want to react to. Let's put a pause on this and come back to it tomorrow when you've had a chance to process, and kind of help coach those skills of, I need speed, but not at the cost of sanity. And so helping also understand, like, this is a 5-minute decision, or is this a 5-hour decision, or is this something we're going to live with for 5 years, and kind of reframe the significance of the thousands and thousands of decisions we're making every day. And so it's giving myself the pause, but then also helping those around me have the pause. So whether they're a stakeholder I'm working with, or a direct report, or someone else, it's kind of giving us all that check-in to say we're not operating from a stable position right now. Let's take an actual pause to figure out why or why not. And is this something we want to push through, or is this something we want to put on the shelf and come back to when we've had a moment? Because I have a piece of advice that I always give folks that I'm mentoring, especially when they're in a toxic work environment, and which is never quit on a bad day. And it's that, and I am guilty of doing that earlier in my career, where you have that sense of like, that's it, I'm throwing in the towel, I can't do this anymore. Sometimes it's helpful to kind of, if you still want to quit later when things have calmed down, by all means, reorientation is necessary, especially when you're constantly in decision fatigue. Giving yourself permission and grace to work through it in time pays dividends down the road.
I'm curious what you would say to someone. I'm kind of channeling the leaders I work with when we're starting out, where there's often this shared experience of, yeah, I want to do these things. I want to be able to slow down. I want to catch myself before I go and kind of lash out at somebody when I was really just upset and frustrated about this other thing. I want to be able to take that pause and shift from reactivity to responsiveness, but I can't seem to do that. What would you say to that? What is, and maybe even from your own experience of what has helped you develop that ability? Because I'm assuming it wasn't always quite that ability, that capacity wasn't always there.
This is probably not the playbook you thought I'd pull this from, but toddler parenting content
Mm-hmm.
has taught me a lot of really hard skills around this. Setting a shared experience in that moment can be really powerful, and certainly know your audience. I mean, if this is your boss's boss's boss, you might have a little less shared trust in that conversation. But if I'm in a one-on-one environment or in a team environment and I find that the reactivity is creeping up, sometimes it's as helpful as saying, I'm going to pause before responding because I don't think I'm thinking about this clearly. Going back to the toddler example, it's something that when you are parenting through those young years, a really effective tactic is to name your experiences and their experiences. Of, you're really upset right now that you've dropped your snack. We can't eat the snack now because it's covered in mulch. I can't wait to eat one with you later, right? And it seems so simple, but you take that tool and you can bring it into the workplace. You're very frustrated that you don't have your presentation done. I also want to look great in front of the team on Friday. Here's what we can do. And so when I'm thinking about my own reaction, you can still use very politically safe words, if you will. I'm not thinking clearly about that right now. Let me pause for a moment and collect my thoughts. I have a few ideas, but let me write them down before I come back to you with an answer. Is this an answer that you need in this moment, or can we revisit it? Or even just hedging. I think hedging is a tool that is incredibly powerful, and it almost acts as that bridge of like the perfect state of, I'm going to breathe through this and meditate on it and really think it through. You're right, we don't have that luxury. And you'll probably get a lot of odd looks in most companies that you work in. But when you reframe it in a safe way of, let me think through the additional context. I had a meeting on this last week. Give me the afternoon to look at my notes. You can create space for yourself in a way that is candidly socially acceptable, because not everybody is going to be as bought into this framework as they should be. But also builds a habit for you that then you can model for your teams as well. Because what I have found is the more I do these behaviors, the more I see them in the people I work with, where they also have permission to say, do we need to answer this at this moment, or can we come back? And it's just this place of safety that allows everybody to operate a little more calmly. Now, I will say, you need to also have a system of accountability for yourself, because it is easier just to go into the moment and react. So make sure you have the system to back that up, because when you ask for the pause and then you give the follow through, the next time you ask for that pause, it's a no-brainer for the person you're working with, because they know they can rely on you. And then that gets you in a place where you're building this muscle of honoring when you can execute at your highest capacity, in a way that allows you to show up as the person you want to show up as. We want to be proud of the work that we're doing in a workplace, and it doesn't feel good when we are not showing up in a way that feels authentic or as productive as we want it to be. But redefining what that persona looks like and giving it power and strength it feels like a small change, but when these little changes add up, you can then go into these breakneck speed environments that are only getting faster by the day and still manage to actually sleep at night without feeling like your heart's going to leap out of your chest. And it's a long game mindset, but one that is incredibly helpful.
You're naming a few things here that when it comes to basically working as a human being and allowing yourself to be human at work, uh, this is what I think we're really talking about at the end of the day. And so I love that you brought it back to toddler parenting. In nervous system work, I like to talk about how, when you're working with the nervous system, you can learn so much from young kids because it's like raw nervous system. They don't have the filters, the sophisticated adult filters that you have, the ability to like shift into executive functioning on a whim. And so you're getting like a sneak peek into exactly what's going on into the nervous system. And it can teach us a lot about what's actually going on in there underneath this composed adult exterior. And then how do you work with that? And so what you're describing to me is effectively like, how do we recognize, yeah, okay, there's a part of me, there's a whole system within me that says I have to cry and scream because my snack fell into the mulch, and I have to cry and scream because this project is not on time. And that's what we're trying to address with all of these kind of executive functioning cover-ups, as opposed to recognizing, all right, this is going on in here. If I try and take action from this place, it's probably going to get messy. I'm probably not going to communicate myself the way I would like to. And to allow that humanity to be there and to give it some space. And this is the part that goes back to, I think, what we were talking about, or what the expectations are in terms of how we should be showing up, which is very mechanistic. And it can be as simple, starting with some of those examples you gave of how to take that pause. It can be as simple as pausing the meeting and saying, I have to run to the bathroom quickly. Or like whatever you have to do to get that pause, so that you can give that a moment to run through you, just like a toddler needs to have the moment of the emotional storm, and then it passes more quickly than we realize, as long as we let it happen and don't fight it.
I could not agree more. My favorite phrases, and if we work together, I'm outing myself. My favorite ways to buy time in a way that is still polished and composed. Tell me more about that. Put it back on them and give myself space to process. Or let me say that back to you. Or going back to, can we revisit this at another time? There's so many ways that you can create space to continue to get back to that place. And this one I wouldn't recommend in a work context, but there is something about that screaming and crying reaction that the little ones have. Sometimes you do just go scream into the pillow really quick and come back. It's one of the benefits of a remote work is that we have a little more. We're not on stage all day, and so how can you use that to your advantage as well? Because sometimes you just need to lean into the feeling, get out of your system, and get back to it.
Yeah. And this is where having some of these tools in your tool belt can be really helpful. And you were naming a couple earlier. And if you're not able to scream, maybe you're able to do some of that neurogenic tremoring, maybe to shake it out a bit. Every office, even if you're not working remotely, every office has a bathroom. So there's a place to hide and do your weird somatic exercises somewhere, even if you can't do the loud ones in an office. But this is going back to what it means to be human at work. You mentioned something that I think is so important for those of us who want to see work go in this direction, which is we have to model it. we can't just talk about it. And it's actually more helpful if instead of telling our teams, hey, I'm doing this thing and this is really helpful, to be able to show it through how we're engaging in our day to day with our teams is, first of all, very disarming, but also gives people the experience where they're then likely to ask you, hey, like this situation, like the way that we moved through this situation was different this time. What's going on here? And for you to then integrate that more into the way you work.
Wouldn't that be the best place to work?
Can you share a little bit more about any shifts that you've seen? And I know sometimes it's hard to do this, but looking at, if you imagine it, if we simplify it to pre-somatic awareness, post-somatic awareness, Rachel, any specific differences that have stood out to you in terms of the way you and the teams you work with, in terms of what it looks like?
Awareness has been a big piece of it. So for myself, knowing my cues before my cues get too loud to avoid, that has been incredibly productive. I trained myself early in my career to operate on fumes all the time. And there was this sense of pushing through just one more email, one more response, one more message. And so post somatic work, it was realizing that operating 24/7 at 50% was serving nobody. And that, again, going back to this highs and lows, that stepping away for a minute to recharge and then come back and having my teams do the same, that on average, the output's actually higher because the quality of the work is better. It doesn't mean that, I'm going on these week-long vacations to recharge, which has its time and place, but it's the power of 5 minutes. And it's also in a place of, we've all heard these tips before, but actually leaning into multitasking less. So I've actually reduced my content consumption where I couldn't even wash the dishes without a podcast at one point. And so it's kind of being with my thoughts and understanding that entertainment and learning has a time and a place, but that's giving my body a time to actually internalize what I'm doing. And then for me, it's a lot of physical movement. So figuring out how to be really in tune with my body and turning off the world around me, even for 20 minutes of strength training or a quick walk, or if I have the time, a full yoga class, but even just really paying attention to what each muscle is doing and how I'm feeling in that moment and how that compares to when I did the exact same thing last week, and really just appreciating that part of my life for what it is. It gives so much balance back to the other pieces. And so it's just being present across the board. And then again, leaning into that seasonality for me and understanding that some weeks are just going to be big, busy, full, wonderful weeks. And then that can be balanced with a bit of a more mindful, intentional recharge. And so it has kept me in a place where I no longer feel like I'm one magic vitamin away from de-stressing, and that I'm not one productivity hack of finally getting that inbox to zero every night. And it's a place where I started realizing, prioritizing where my attention went and where my energy went, and how can I show up in a way that was really serving myself and my team in the best way it could. And some days are better than others, but all in all, it really is leaning into the marathon mindset. Our careers are not 5 years long, thank goodness. And how can this serve us in the long run?
There's a commitment to being present, for one, but a recognition that doing so requires giving your brain a chance to access different states. And we tend to think, like, if I can just squeeze more and more information, more and more learning, more and more output, that will be generative. But the reality is that we have to have that space in order for our brain to access different modes of being. And what you were describing was not just I'm doing these things because they're good for me, but I'm doing these things with a certain quality, and I'm taking the podcast out of my ear while I'm doing the dishes or while I'm going for a walk, which I think many of us can relate to. Is when that's what we're used to, it can feel very jarring to have the quiet when we're engaging in some of these activities, and there can be a hump to get past. But once we get past that initial hump, and I've heard this from client after client, once you get past that initial hump, the relief that you feel from allowing your brain waves to move through the different cycles that are natural to a human brainwave pattern in a given day is something that we don't realize we're missing to the extent that we are. And we don't realize how integral that is in our ability to do the work that we care about and show up instead of at 50% at closer to 100%.
There is absolutely a mental shift of not forcing efficiency into every corner of your life. There was an old version of me that thought that I was wasting time by not maximizing every minute of the day. And there's a whole thought process behind that. And there are some things that are restorative because they're not efficient necessarily. And so the other thing that I value is I cook dinner almost every night, not because I think that's the only way to live your life, but because that to me is meditative in nature. And it's not efficient. It's not optimized. It makes a mess every night without fail. And it also means that I'm generally back on my computer at night for a few emails because my day is ending at a time where I can do that for my children. And it goes against the rule book in some ways, but it's serving me. And so it's leaning into that's my reset. It may not be everybody's, but that's the kind of practice that it is optimizing my life, but from a different definition than the maximizing, right? It's just a different way of thinking about how to spend my time and what that's doing for me day over day.
Yeah. And recognizing that any animal or plant operates within cycles. And some of the latest neuroscience research is pointing to anywhere between 4 to 6 hours per day is the maximum that we have for high intensity cognitive output and attention. And yet our workday is 8 plus hours. And we just don't realize the diminishing returns we have without giving ourselves breaks. And this is something that I find so interesting, especially because the most well-known CEOs I've had access to in terms of how they spend their day, every single one has scheduled effectively boredom time in their day because they know that they cannot possibly make the decisions and be as present as they need to be throughout the day without that time. And we're expecting ourselves to just go all the way through the day with nonstop stimulation.
That's exactly the word for it. And it's this availability fallacy. And there's going to be a lot of people that think like, good for them, not for me. I can't not be on Slack all day. I can't not be on email all day. The best thing I did for my brain was turn off the pop-up notifications. I know that's not groundbreaking, but
I mean, you'd be
there's like a
surprised.
before time and an after time
Yeah.
that, and it's, I make it a point to check in every 30 minutes or an hour, especially, I can kind of tell what days need a little bit more attention versus not. But batching how I use my brain, I've gotten rid of my second screen, which is really just it is allowing me to probably produce that 4 to 6 hours because I've carved out the peanut butter spread of my attention across a message here, a thread there. And I treat, there's things I do in like my Slack and workspace where like I'll read everything at once and it takes me 10 minutes versus 1 minute every 10 minutes all day long. And it's just, you can continue to show up in the way that our workforce demands that you do show up, right? We're not all CEOs that can take that time, although we should, but you can create that time in more ways than we think. And so I love that boredom time, borrowing that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think this is, yes, we all are in different roles, and some of us have more freedom than others in their expectations. And there is something to be said for, we're asking ourselves, where might I have a little bit of leeway that maybe I haven't exercised because of the expectations I place on myself. And I think, and this is really a core intention of this podcast is those of us who are thinking about this coming together and saying, I want to model this. I don't want to keep perpetuating the old way of working that is not conducive to being a human being, and then spills over into the entirety of our lives and the systems we exist within. So my personal encouragement is for all of us to look for those little opportunities. And this is one of the things I loved about what you were sharing before we hopped on this conversation, was around, it doesn't have to be big. Like, there are simple ways of integrating little practices and ways of coming back to our humanity, my words. Like, it doesn't have to mean a wholesale reconfiguration of the way we're working. And I think you're such a great example of that. You didn't have to go live on a farm, as far as I know.
No. By all means, if you want to, but you can stay in the high growth career. You can you can live in the heart of the city, and you can still find ways to give your mind and body space. You don't have to be all or nothing. It's that permission to create a rhythm that doesn't drain your body. And it's also practicing a healthy level of non-attachment with your work. We haven't opened that can of worms here yet, but it's also, that was the other, I guess that's really the big pre-somatic, post-somatic relationship I had, was the emotional attachment, the character, the attaching my self-worth to my work output. And that was therapy and somatic, and the whole
Yes.
thing, and age and what have you. But it's a healthy attachment with the outcome, taking pride in my contributions and caring about the people around me and their success, and realizing that when those two things are true, that's enough. And giving permission to let that be enough, versus really letting my external experiences define how I'm showing up as well.
This is the beauty I found in developing a deeper sense of what's going on within you internally, and a relationship with that, is that our reliance on external means of okayness and stability is as far as decreases, because we have a sense of familiarity with those waves that are just natural and inherent to the everyday, and we don't have to be constantly grasping for stability outside of ourselves. That's a really powerful thing. So as we close here, one thing that I would really like to hear as an example of going back to this, I think this before and after is really powerful. Of, yeah, I like, none of us were always this way or function this way. We had to get here. I think one way of exploring that is, if you, the kind of maybe somewhat cliche question, but if you had to give Rachel of however many years ago one piece of advice, is that this is how you can get started and stop spinning your wheels, what might you say to her?
You don't have to carry everything end to end. Nobody is winning from a hero mindset, the diving catch mindset of I'll do it all. is actually a trap. Nobody's thinking about you as much as you're thinking about you, so you might as well maximize that to your favor. And if you pause for a moment and take a half a step back, it's not going to crumble. It's letting go or leaning into the fact that what I was building was not as fragile as I thought it was.
There's no need to grip as hard as we've learned. It's things are not quite as fragile as they seem. Yeah. Love that messaging. Rachel, thank you so much for being here. I want to encourage everyone to check Rachel out on LinkedIn because your shares there are so insightful and really bridge the gap between this work and operations and what it means to show up powerfully at work. Any other ways that you'd recommend that people learn more about you or connect with you?
I mostly show up on LinkedIn. It's where I found my voice. It's where I create a feed of really intelligent people as well. And then I do some one-on-one coaching, both business coaching and professional coaching on the side as well. But in general, I operate from a position of leave it better than you found it. And platforms like yours are helping us spread that message even more effectively. So if that's your cup of tea, let's connect.
Thank you so much. I hope this was helpful for you. Share your feedback with me, find me on LinkedIn, and please leave a review. Share this with a friend. Let's bring more people into the conversation around working with feeling at the root of all the growth, all the evolution we're going for. It starts with feeling.